It's not often that we'll do a phone video, but sometimes I see a phone that kind of gets my attention. This is the brand new Motorola Edge 50 Pro, and it's a phone that got my attention, but did it get my attention for a good reason? Let's find out.
This video is brought to you by MSI and their brand new OLED gaming monitors. Endgame OLED gaming monitors are finally here. Now is the perfect time to upgrade. Take your immersion to the next level with stunning QD OLED performance from MSI. Experience up to a blazing fast 360Hz refresh rate at 1440p or glorious 4K resolution at 240Hz for the ultimate gaming and creator setup. With true-to-life color calibration that's ready to go right out of the box, VESA Display HDR True Black 400 certification, unbeatable 0.03 millisecond grey-to-grey response times, KVM support, a massive array of connectivity ports, and an impressive 3-year OLED warranty, there's never been a better time to go OLED. Find out more about MSI's new range of QD OLED gaming monitors via the links in the video description. Get back to work, Nick.
I'll be honest with you guys, it's no secret that I daily drive a Pixel 8 Pro, but I'm the kind of person that uses two phones, not one phone. I've been using this Motorola Edge 50 Pro for about 6 weeks, and I wanted to share some of the things that I found with it because it's one of those phones that maybe you'll find something interesting if you're looking for a new phone, or maybe not. I always find it difficult to talk about phones because for me, they're the kind of device that I just want to pick them up and I want them to do the thing. So does the Motorola Edge 50 Pro do the thing? Specs wise, the Motorola Edge 50 Pro is kind of positioned in the mid tier, with this phone in particular using the Snapdragon 7 Gen 3 SM7550AB and the Adreno 720 for its GPU. The version that I've got here is the 256 gig storage version with 12 gigs of RAM, but it also comes in a lower spec with only 8 gig of RAM too. This one is kind of right in the middle of all the specs. The Edge 50 Pro also runs a pretty current version of Android. It runs Android 14, and the version Motorola has kind of feels close to stock Android. It feels kind of pixely, to be honest, but not in a bad way. It features a 6.7-inch POLED display with a 144Hz refresh rate. It's got a 20:9 aspect ratio, and it feels like quite a long device in your hand because of that aspect ratio. It's got a 1220p screen, and apparently this is Pantone validated, but Pantone validation is only dependent on how much money a company wants to pay to get validated. So anyone can do it if they want to spend the money. Honestly, with this 144Hz refresh rate, it feels relatively snappy, although at 144Hz, it's gonna rip right through your battery. Speaking of the battery, it has a 4500 milliamp hour battery. I found that with phones these days, it's more dependent on the software optimization rather than overall battery life. If you lower the brightness of your device and you lock the refresh rate, for instance, you can dramatically increase the battery life. That said though, because I use this as my second phone, I noticed the battery life being decent, but because it's not my main phone, it's really hard to say what that would be like. It also has 125 watt wired charging and 50 watt wireless charging, but wireless charging is the only way that I charge my devices, and it's the only way that I charge this phone, and I had no problems with that whatsoever. Underneath the display is a fingerprint reader. This is pretty standard with Android phones. However, the Edge 50 Pro's fingerprint reader is a lot further down, and it takes quite a bit of getting used to. If you can just look at where the Pixel icon is compared to the Motorola one, you can see like the Pixel one's higher up, Motorola one's further down, and I constantly go to like higher up to unlock it. But anyway, that's just me. I'm an idiot, right? As for the overall user experience and the design, I gotta say with this phone, I don't hate it. The design of the Edge 50 Pro is quite sleek in your hands, and it's ergonomic, and it's really narrow, and I don't hate that it's narrow. It kind of just, I can almost wrap my fingers around it, and that feels kind of nice. And that's with the case on the phone too. So yeah, it's definitely not terrible. But again, this may not be your cup of tea. The thing is, like, because it's so thin, I like how it feels. Even with this included case, it's not terrible. As for the custom Motorola Android stuff with gestures and all this AI stuff they're talking about, guys, I use on-screen buttons. I don't care about any of it. Sorry, not sorry. I just don't use any of it, so it doesn't appeal to me. All of the things that the Edge Pro 50 should do as a phone, it does. It's got a decent screen. It runs a relatively recent version of Android. It has decent battery life as far as I can tell. And when you call it, it rings. But that's not what all people look for in phones. I'm the kind of person who takes lots of photos and videos with their phones, and I do lots of random stuff with it. And I'm also not the type of person to constantly be on their phone, if that makes sense. Like, I don't just sit there going, oh, look at me, I'm on social media all the time. I just don't do that. I want a phone camera to be good. That is really important to me. And I hate that that's a thing for me. So what I did is I took the Motorola Edge 50 Pro to Taiwan to test it out. That's what I did. Now, it was a rainy Saturday night. We went to the Shilin night markets in Taipei with a bunch of our other YouTuber friends to explore a bit and have some fun. This is kind of a great test for average light and low light conditions because it's just not ideal. While walking down one of the back streets on our way to meet everyone, I took a bunch of pictures. The one that you're seeing on your screen right now is shot at the natural exposure for the lens with no tweaks, and I used the wide lens. As you can see, it's a little bit dark. The composition's pretty average, and it's shot on that 13 megapixel wide lens. But because Motorola didn't try and reinvent the wheel by making their own photo app, they instead opted to use Google Photos. And surprisingly, you get a lot of the same features that you'd get with a Google Pixel. You can use the auto lighting tool, and this fixes basically anything. And you've got access to basically every tool there is on a Pixel, which is kind of cool when you think about it for the price. That's not the only thing though. I used the wide lens again, and I flipped the phone upside down, and I dropped the end of the phone into a puddle of water. I don't recommend doing this. I mean, you can if you want to kill your hardware, but this is a photo straight out of the phone with no editing in full auto, and the weather here is completely average. It's dusk, but this photo doesn't look horrible. Like, I gotta say, it's really not that bad. The conditions were terrible for photos. But before I took that shot, I was standing in the same spot, and Claire was standing there, and she was in my shot. I was like, Claire, get out of my shot. As I mentioned, because Motorola isn't trying to reinvent the wheel, I can use the Pixel's Magic Eraser tool in the Photos app and remove Claire from the photo. So, you know. Now, here's a bunch of other photos taken on the same night, so you can get a bit of an idea of what the low light performance is like with this camera on the phone. Look, it's not terrible, right? It's not terrible at all, and I think it does the job pretty well. But I know what you're thinking. Didn't you say you also cared about video? I do. I captured some video on this too. Now, I shot some stuff at 4K 30, which is unfortunately the maximum video resolution in both portrait and landscape. And also I did some 1080p video. If I'm being honest, the fact that it only does 4K 30 is a bit disappointing, given there's phones that are much cheaper that can capture much higher frame rates. But at the end of the day, 30 frames is fine. Well, we'll come back to that. In portrait orientation at 1080p, the video looks fine. It's nothing groundbreaking. At 4K 30 in portrait orientation again, it looks fine. In landscape, the video also looks fine. I feel like in low light situations, the video looks a little bit smeared and it's not as sharp as some other phones. When we have a situation with lots of ambient light and artificial light, it does perform a little bit better, but it's definitely not the best with video performance in these lighting situations. And a lot of phones struggle here with that as well. Also, listen to the audio. It's not good. It seems like it's trying to control the file sizes too much and kind of dropping and compressing that audio bit rate to sound like it's one of those low quality versions of Nookie by Limp Bizkit that you downloaded off Napster back in the day. It really doesn't sound good. I just don't understand how they didn't get that right. But what about natural light for photo and video? Well, the only way to test this is by actually leaving the house. First of all, we tested out the macro photo functionality. The results here were Actually pretty surprising. This one uses that main 50 megapixel camera for this functionality. The photos are a lot better than I thought they'd be, but you've got 50 megapixels of headroom, so it should be a little bit better, even though the sensor's still the same. I won't go into that. The colors are vibrant and the focus is on point. The depth of field with this shot here is really nice, but I can't take credit for this composition because it's all Claire. That's what she does, she's good at it. But speaking about how we tested this phone, there's another lens. It's the telephoto lens. It's no surprise that the telephoto camera looks like a hot pixelated mess. And yeah, shout out to Jack for being in this photo for some reason. What's even stranger is when you film and you switch between the main camera and that telephoto lens, with it switching between these modes and you seeing it change between the different cameras, it is jarring. I feel like it's pretty standard with phones to see it switching between cameras, but the Edge 50 Pro felt a little bit more jarring than usual. Okay, every time I get a phone in, I do the same thing. I like to see how it is to film skateboarding, and more specifically in slow motion. This is an interesting one because at 4K 30 in the daylight, the Edge 50 Pro does fine. Like, it doesn't look terrible. This is using the main camera, and to be honest, it doesn't look horrible in portrait orientation. However, the toe drag from Jack doing that fakey bigger flip looks pretty horrible. Sorry, Jack. Also, here's Austin doing a tray flip in slow motion, and this is a side-by-side comparison with the iPhone 15 Pro Max and the Pixel 8 Pro, all at their widest settings. The Edge 50 Pro and the Pixel 8 Pro look pretty similar, but there's a pretty clear winner here, and it's the iPhone 15 Pro Max. And that's for a very simple reason. You can use the ultra-wide lens for slow-mo. You can't do that on most Android phones for some reason. I don't get it. Here's the thing, and this is kind of an important thing with phones. I know people aren't buying phones for the camera alone, but surprisingly, after talking to a lot of people about their phones and the cameras that they use in their phones, because a lot of content creators I'm friends with use their phones for making content, I found that more often than not, people care about the camera. And I find myself caring about it a lot more too. But for someone who doesn't care about the nitty-gritty stuff like me, like I don't care about the CPU or the GPU of phone users, I think the Edge 50 Pro does a good job of doing the thing. And that's being a decent phone. There are some strange things though. The delay when starting to record the video is really odd. Surely Motorola could have made it a bit faster. Too much latency between going through modes. But other than that, yeah, I don't really hate this phone. If you're interested in the Motorola Edge 50 Pro, here's the thing. In the configuration that I've got here, it's around 999 Aussie dollars. The main problem is, I don't even think this phone is making its way to the US or Canada right now because I haven't been able to find the price anywhere. And it's hard to say what that price is going to be. I think Motorola is trying to focus on other markets right now and not the core market. I'll be honest with you, I got a lot of American friends and they all use iPhones, so I can see it being hard to get into that market. I don't know why iPhones are so popular in America. It just doesn't make sense to me. The thing is with phones in other regions I've noticed, Europeans love Android and there's less iPhones. In Australia, it's a mix of both. Everybody uses everything. But I gotta say, like my main concern with this phone again is probably gonna be the price. Even though it's packed with heaps of features and it's not a terrible device, it doesn't use a current gen SoC and it feels like it's missing something. I just can't put my finger on what that is. Maybe I'm just too used to using stuff like the Pixel 8 Pro and the iPhone 15 Pro and the Pro Max. I don't know, there's just something about it that I cannot put my finger on. I haven't figured it out. But that being said, I don't think I'd have a problem using the Motorola Edge 50 Pro as my main phone. It just doesn't feel that bad. But again, I just can't put my finger on what it's missing. Let me know what you think of this new phone from Motorola. I think the Edge 50 Pro is a decent phone. I think it's maybe just a year too late because the Edge 40 Pro used a current gen SoC. This one doesn't. And it's weird for me as well because we only cover a few phones a year. And sometimes something like the Edge 50 Pro really stands out because of its features. But the lack of availability in other regions and not knowing prices makes this phone a little bit hard for me to recommend right now. I like this phone, but as always, not knowing the US price or the Canadian price is a bit of a sticking point because our core audience is from the US and Canada. And that's a fact. I think a lot of companies forget. Just because we're in Australia doesn't mean that everybody watching these videos is from Australia. Yeah, bit of a tricky one. Thanks for watching. Not a terrible phone though. I like it.